Hi guys. All right, so this video is going to be on skill deconstruction and how we break down the skills in order to teach them correctly and the proper progressions for our gymnastics classes. This is going to be for any skill that you do, whether it's an advanced skill or a beginner preschool skill. So it's important to have really good deconstruction skills, and I want you to be able to do that well. So we're going to talk about this. This PowerPoint in part is based on an article from Technique Magazine and then also my own skill deconstruction sheet that we use here at the gym. So let's move over to the PowerPoint and we'll get to going on it. All right, so skill deconstruction, the art of the breakdown. And what we are going to do today is first determine what is a skill, which is a whole part movement that creates and develops more advanced skills. These are things like cartwheels, handstands, rolls, back handsprings, giant swings, back hip circles, anything that is a full out skill that we consider a skill in gymnastics. And we also have to know what a drill or a lead up is. And these are a part of a movement that creates and develops a single or whole skill. These examples are things like rock and rolls, candlesticks, your positions, stem rises, which lead to a kip. You can use the candlesticks to lead up to back extension rolls. Rock and rolls lead to forward rolls, front tucks, all kinds of things. So these are little things that are within the movement or the skill itself that we can use to teach the skill as a whole. So the process of creating lead-ups from critical skills is called skill deconstruction. So determining lead-ups. We're going to go through the steps to how we determine the lead-ups that we need to use for each skill, and then I'll kind of show you how to put those together. So the first thing is you need to determine the parts of the skill that determine the success of the skill, and then you choose 3 to 5 of those parts to create lead-ups. So if I was teaching a handstand forward roll, I would know that they need to be able to do rock and rolls and to be able to stand up from the round position with their arms by their ears. So we would teach a rock and roll. I would know they need to be able to hold their body weight and keep their head off the ground. So we might do some donkey kicks to make sure that they understand that. We would also know that they need to be able to do a forward roll, and they need to be able to do a handstand. So we would certainly be sure that we broke those skills down and taught those together. So they're going to need the kicking movement. So we would work donkey kicks for kicking as well. So I would determine the 3 to 5 parts that are the most important for that skill, and then I would create a circuit of lead-up stations to that. Next, I would list these components in the order that they appear in the skills process. So obviously the kicking motion of a handstand forward roll is going to come first, or the lever actually is going to come first, so we would teach levers. Then we would do the kick up to the handstand. The weight support is also going to be next, so we would work on weight support. The rolling process is going to be next, so we would work on their rock and rolls and how to stand up out of that, and then the finish position. So you're going to break those down and put them in the order that they appear. Then you're going to look at each part as a lead up that's going to develop that skill. So it's not necessarily a skill, although you can treat it as a skill. And so, you know, a lot of gyms have star charts that they use, and you can take lead ups and give them names and give kids stars for those skills so that they feel like they're developing those skills. It's important for children to have instant success. They like immediate gratification. So if you treat your lead ups as skills, then they're going to leave every class feeling like they've been successful, and that's really important. Decide whether any of these parts require a particular shape, which is things like hollow, arch, squat, any kind of positions or anything like that. And you're going to want to teach those shapes and positions as well. So those are some of the things that you can include in your group work prior to teaching your skills, is the shapes and the positions that they're going to need for the skill. Then you're going to decide whether any of these parts involve changing from one shape to another, i.e. hollow to an arch shape. Obviously, in a tap swing, we go from a hollow shape to an arch shape and then back to a hollow shape. So you're going to work on the shape changes with them. And this is another thing that can be used in your group work, is changing from one shape to another and learning that process. Then you're going to decide on what parts require what muscle groups and what flexibility and strength is necessary to execute that part correctly. So again, in your conditioning group exercises, you can work the muscle groups for that particular skill that you're teaching for the week, and also in your stretches, whether it's at the beginning or in a specific flexibility rotation or at the end of class, you can work on the flexibility that you need for that particular skill. So for instance, if you're teaching bridge kickovers, you may need to work on shoulder flexibility that week, and teach them the stretches they can do at home to help with their shoulder flexibility. Then you are going to determine if more than one part can be linked with an additional part to create a combination lead up for the skill. So in other words, if you're doing handstand forward rolls, there is a combination of handstand and then a forward roll. So you might do a station that requires them to do handstand, step down, and then squat and forward roll, so they can start feeling those movements together. It's not necessarily the actual skill itself, it's two skills put together, but it does create a feeling of what it's going to feel like as they do a handstand and then they do a roll. So that's going to be something that can help as well during your deconstruction. So there's a couple of things that you need to note about whole part instruction. First is you need to teach from easiest to hardest. So in other words, pick the things that are easiest for them to learn that are parts of the skill and teach those first, and then move on to the harder parts of the skill. So you always want to teach your circuits in order of easiest to hardest. However, you also want to make sure you're following progression of the skill, like the order they appear in the skill. So you may have some harder ones that you have to teach at the end, that may be the middle of the skill. So for instance, in a handstand forward roll, the handstand support is probably the hardest part of that skill. So you may not want to do the handstand support in that order in your circuit, because you may want to have that as like a spotted station or something. So use your common sense when you're doing it, but mostly we try to teach from easiest to hardest, and we also try to teach in progressive order of the way they appear in the skill. And then create a circuit in the proper order to finalize at the spotted skill station. For instance, a handstand forward roll circuit would include something like a forward roll as one of my stations, the rock and roll to stand, the weight support, the lever position, and then at the end I would have them put all of those things together and create the actual skill itself as a spotted station. So you would take the parts of the skill, you would put them in the proper order, and then you would have them finish up at the spotted station where you're actually spotting the entire whole skill together with all of the parts put together. So the breakdown process includes, number one, you're going to want to determine the purpose of the skill, why we do that skill, what carryover value that skill has. For instance, a forward roll will lead up to a punch front. You're also going to want to know what they use it for in 6 months, 2 years, and 5 years. It also includes preparation. So in order to prepare for the skill, what are the kids going to have to do? What skill or physical abilities do they need to have to begin this skill? What should they have learned in a previous level in order to build to this skill? In other words, if they're doing bridge kickovers, they're going to need a bridge, and that's probably a skill in a previous level that they should have learned. So you're going to want to know what the preparation is for that. And then what have you taught them in their current level up to this point that is a lead up to this skill? So you want to make sure that you understand and are aware of the preparation that they need for the skill first, and make sure that you've covered all of that prior to teaching the skill. Then what is the emphasis going to be on for the skill? What are you going to emphasize when you're teaching the skill? Name any keywords that you're going to use when you're teaching the skill. Those are things like hollow, arch, round, big, little, big kick, lever. Those are all the types of keywords. So you're going to want to know what those are and make sure that the kids understand what those terms are as you use them. And then how the center of gravity changes throughout the skill is very important, because that's going to help them to understand the process of the skill. Give examples of ways to teach the skill that use as many of the senses as possible. Keep in mind that children are either an auditory learner, a kinesthetic learner, or a visual learner. So if you have a mixture of all three of these in your class, you're going to want to make sure that you show them how to do the skill, you tell them how to do the skill, and then you spot them through the skill the first time through so that they can feel the skill. That covers all three types of learning styles, and it incorporates as much of their senses as possible: their sight, their hearing, their touch, and then even if you have an idea to incorporate some other senses into that as well, that's a great idea, and you can do that as well. Just be creative, but make sure that you bring as many of those learning styles and as much of the senses as possible when you're teaching the skill for the first time. Then you're going to want to understand the difference between cause and effect. Okay, you want to be able to trace errors back to their roots. Avoid novice coaching corrections and treat the cause, not the effect. By this, what I mean is the effect of loose legs is that they are bent. So when I'm correcting as a coach, I'm not going to say straight legs, because that doesn't really tell them anything. That tells them they're bending their legs, and that's wrong, but it doesn't tell them the cause and exactly why they're bending their legs. It just tells them the result of the cause. The cause is actually that they're not squeezing their legs and pressing their knees flat and tight. So I would tell them, be sure you press your knees flat and tight so that you can keep your legs straight during the skill. That way I'm treating both the cause and I'm pointing out the effect of that cause. So always understand the difference between cause and effect. And you're going to want to think of the most common problems that you see with that skill, and you're going to want to analyze the cause and the effect of each one of those problems so that you can correct accordingly when you start teaching the skill. List the common mistakes of the skill, which is the effect, and then give the cause of those mistakes. That way you're prepared to give the correct instruction when you see them making those mistakes. Then motivation, you're going to want to talk about that. Remember that without intrinsic motivation, children will not care or be interested in the skill. So if it's not a skill they're interested in learning, let's say they're learning forward rolls and they're not interested in that, well, you might remind them that that forward roll is going to lead up to a punch front later, and they're going to get really excited about that. It's going to help them to stay motivated because they're like, if I can get this, then later I get to get this skill. So it's really important that you have motivation planned for when you're teaching skills, especially the boring skills like levers and things like that, because the kids are going to want to know why they're learning it and what it's going to get them to eventually. So you're going to want to give them that motivation. And then what ideas do you have to motivate them to want to do the skill correctly? And you can tell them, a lot of times, especially if you have a star chart program, some type of a star program where they get a star at the end of, when they've completed skills to put on like a poster or whatever, you can tell them, hey, this is a star skill, so if you do it correctly, I'm going to get to mark off on your star cards what you got today. Or you can say, hey, if you do this skill correctly, then we're going to go ahead and get to play with the parachute today. Or if you do this skill correctly, it's going to lead me to be able to teach you this skill. And so that's going to help them to be motivated as also. So make sure that you give them things that are going to motivate them. So have some ideas in mind on what to do to keep them motivated to learn the skills. And then explain the rhythm of the skill, and if you can, put it to music or counts. For instance, cartwheels are hand, hand, foot, foot. So you can even clap it out for them, hand, hand, foot, foot, or you can have them practice hand, hand, foot, foot by actually doing the movement and just tapping their hands on the ground one at a time, and then tapping their feet on the ground one at a time as you say hand, hand, foot, foot. So really explain the rhythm to them so they actually understand that, because kids are really good about understanding things in rhythm or in counts because their brain is good at working through that type of stuff. And then you want to be ready to challenge them. So what can you do to challenge the student that already has the skill? This is important not only for motivation, but also to keep them engaged in the class and in the skill learning process. You want to make sure that you are able to challenge that child. So if a child can already do a cartwheel, you might have a one-handed cartwheel station for them to do instead, or you might challenge them, okay, try to do it with one arm this time. If they have a good one-arm cartwheel, try teaching them to do a far arm one-arm cartwheel. Anything that's going to challenge them to make it harder for them, you need to keep that in mind and be ready to give your upper students those challenges so that they don't get bored. And then always the finish position should prepare them for the next skill. So you always want to make sure that you're emphasizing their finish positions to be correct so that it can move on to the next skill. For instance, cartwheels finish in a lunge. That way they can actually do an additional cartwheel on the opposite side connected to it, or they can do a turn and do another skill with it. You want to make sure that your finish positions for all your skills are taught correctly so that they can move on to the next skill, and it's preparing them for the next skill. And then how do you add variety? You can use props, you can use toys, you can use you can use anything for variety. So when you're teaching cartwheels, you can use hoops, you can use blocks, you can use stuffed animals, you can use noodles. I mean, there's just a ton of ways you can teach cartwheels. And you can do this with most of your skills. So utilize props and color and anything that you can think of in your gym that is available to add variety to the lesson so that it keeps the kids engaged and interested in what they're doing. And then, is this a skill that should be taught on both sides? Should it be taught with one arm? What variations can you use to keep the students challenged? So you can teach them, you've got a right cartwheel really good. Let's try your left cartwheel. Let's try it on the other side. Anything that's going to challenge your kids will keep them engaged. Can they do it with one arm? Can they do it with no arms? So any kind of variations that you can come up with to challenge those students, that's really, really important. So make sure that you consider those as well during the breakdown process. And then spotting. You're going to want to understand the spotting techniques. Explain the spotting technique for the skill. Make sure that you tell them, I'm going to grab you at your ankles. I want you to push really hard, and I'm going to hold you in this position, or whatever. You want the children to be comfortable with the spotting technique that you're using for the skill. So make sure that if you have a class and you're not sure they're going to be comfortable with how you're spotting, that you explain to them why you spot and what you're going to be doing with them. Also determine, is spotting necessary? There are some skills that spotting is not necessary. You don't have to spot a candlestick. You don't have to spot you can spot a candlestick obviously to get the technique correct, but you don't have to for safety purposes. You don't necessarily have to spot a forward roll. Most kids can roll and get their bottom over their head safely. You might need to spot it to correct technique if they're not holding their chin in or if they're not staying round or whatever, but is the spotting going to be necessary? And if it is, then to make sure that you understand what that is. And then how can you maximize the amount of work the student does so that you minimize the physical work that you're going to do as a coach? Is there a Pac-Man available for you to teach back handsprings instead of you just muscling them over when they're not jumping at all? There's tons of different equipment that you have in your gym that you can use to minimize the amount that you do physically, and it requires the student to do more work and actually learn more than if you're just throwing them through the skills. So that's really important for you to determine how you can maximize the student workload and minimize your workload physically. And then remember that spotting is only used to help the student feel the skill with less fear. So you shouldn't be doing the skill for them. If you're having to do the skill for them, then you're not breaking it down enough. You need to break it down into small enough parts that by the time they get to you, they understand the skill and their body is able to comfortably do the skill fairly well, even though you may have to spot them because they may be lacking in strength or flexibility or something like that, but you shouldn't be doing this skill for them. If you're doing this skill for them, then you are doing entirely too much work on yourself, and you need to back up, break the skill down more, and help your children to learn the smaller steps so that you don't have to work so hard physically. And then use props, equipment, and everything else to minimize the wear and tear on you as a coach. And you can give some examples of how to do this if you're doing a skill deconstruction sheet. Just keep in mind that the props and equipment are there to make your life as a coach easier. So utilize it. Don't just muscle all of your kids through all the skills. Number one, they don't learn it as well if you do that. And number two, it puts way too much wear and tear on your body, and your career is not going to be near as long if you're constantly having to muscle kids over and do the work for them. All right, guys, so hope that was helpful in skill deconstruction. I do have a skill deconstruction sheet that is available for you if you would like to practice on your skill deconstruction, or if you would like to give it out to your staff so that they can do skill deconstruction sheets on different skills, and you can keep them in a binder. At my gym, my staff, each one of my coaches does one skill deconstruction sheet a week on a particular skill that I assign them, and then we log them into a binder so that when we have new coaches that come in and they need help learning how to do a skill, we've always got skill sheets available so they can look at all the different things. So if you're interested in that, you can download that at my website as well, and I think I have a link for it below this video as well. So good luck, and hope this helped. Thanks. Bye.